Gina Prime Time. Now, right before break, we heard from our Weather Nation correspondent, Alana Cameron, who's in Louisiana, reporting on the deadly conditions there. For millions of Texans, it's going on about 3 days without power in single-digit temperatures. But we're learning in downtown Dallas, Texas energy company Encore and many other high-rise buildings have had power, and most of the businesses are empty. Yet apartments and homes nearby have no power. They've gone completely without. And we heard all about the hospital with no heat and no water. So the question many Texans and Americans have is, if Texas is the state that produces more power than any other state in the nation, why are they in a complete blackout? Makes no sense. Joining me now to answer this and other questions is founder of junkscience.com, Steve Milloy. Steve, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Steve, can you explain why, first of all, Texas has been in this complete blackout?
Well, this is really the culmination of about 12 years of bad policy where Texas has been getting rid of, reliable, affordable coal power and moving towards, unreliable wind and less reliable natural gas. And natural gas is fine, but when you get to extreme conditions like this, it doesn't work so well. Nothing works as well as coal. Nothing is as cheap as coal. And then you throw in wind, which is completely unreliable. And the problem is ultimately that the grid operator in Texas, ERCOT, thought that they were going to make it through this cold front with the wind power that they have. And it was going to be a close run thing, but they thought they could make it. They didn't bother to get any of their other backup gas plants or coal plants running. And so when the windmills froze because there was freezing rain, it was just disaster. And it's been like this for 3 days now, and God knows how long it's going to go on. This should be a lesson for everyone. This is what Joe Biden wants to do, what is going on in Texas to the rest of the country. So unless we want to have Biden blackouts, everyone needs to pay attention to what's going on in Texas and learn from it.
And many people understand having options for energy. I have some solar lights around my house. They don't actually work very well on cloudy days. I live in Florida. We don't have a lot of cloudy days, but on the cloudy days, my solar lights don't light my dock. That was one of the first ways I learned that solar might not be the best idea. Liberals and Democrats want to compromise and say going green is the only answer. But if going green with windmills and solar isn't dependable in emergency situations and high demand situations like an ice storm, like we're seeing in Texas right now, how can we get rid of coal and gas and even cutting down on our investment in nuclear?
Right. Well, right. None of our current energy policy makes sense. We should have more nuclear. We should have more coal. We should have more gas. These are base load power sources. They run the grid. If people want to have wind, and maybe possibly some places it makes sense. I don't know where. In Texas, they've got plenty of wind, but they just pay more for electricity. The same is true in California and the Northeast. They have some wind, but it just costs more money. It's not changing the environment. It's not changing the climate. It's not improving their lives. But apparently they feel better by paying more for electricity. Well, but that doesn't work, for most of us. For most of us, we want our electricity to be there all the time. It's not good enough for electricity to be there half the time or most of the time or almost all the time. It must be there all the time, especially when it's 2 degrees outside like it is in Texas. You need to have electricity. And so, the politicians, the grid operator, and the green activists have let everybody down. And all I can say is that, learn this lesson. This is what Joe Biden is going to do to the rest of the grid. He has promised to phase out fossil fuels. So there's just more of this coming.
And he's canceled the Keystone XL pipeline. It was literally one of the first things he did out of the box with an executive order, as you know, leaving many thousands of Americans and Canadians out of jobs. Even the Canadian Prime Minister had something to say about this. At this point, what can be done by the gas and coal industries to fight back against this administration for something that is obviously essential? And it's not just about the jobs that were lost. I mean, Steve, we're talking about dead people at this point. We're talking about, and to me, and I want to be careful how I say this, because I think loss of livelihood matters too. when people's livestock is dying. I have a friend who lost all of her baby goats. They froze to death in her barn last night, and she texted me about it. I know people who've lost, untold amounts of different sorts of, business that they could, that they've told me about. But we've lost human beings in this, and untold amounts of money. That all at some point has to matter. And yet they have this pie in the sky idea that they're going to fix everything by turning everything green. And Steve, I want you to address, I don't want you to be shy about addressing that there's a real profit motive for a lot of friends of folks who benefit from some of this. I want you to go there with this.
Okay, well, you're absolutely right. And I just want to say at the beginning, I worked for the coal industry for a number of years, but I can tell you that if you're relying on the coal industry or the gas industry or the nuclear industry to keep the lights on, you're just, you're whistling up a dark alley, because that's not going to happen. That's not how they operate. That they're not worried about you. They're worried about themselves, and they don't even worry about themselves very well. So, this is a situation where, people that rely on electricity, which is all of us, we've got to beat on our politicians. A year ago, Governor Greg Abbott in Texas, who I like, he's a good Republican, he was bragging about how Texas is the #1 state in wind, and if Texas was a country, it would be the #5 country reliant on or with wind power. Well, I had to retweet his tweet and say, this didn't age very well, because now Texas is the #1 state without electricity, and if Texas were a country, we would call it India, okay, where there's no electricity, or not everyone has electricity. So this is kind of a situation where, we can't rely on the grid operator. I mean, these people are engineers, but of course, they are susceptible to political correctness too, which is what all this wind and solar stuff is. It's just political correctness. It's not making the climate or the environment any better. We're just paying more for it. We're getting nothing. It's a ripoff. Okay, so we have to get engaged. It's up to us. It's not up to anybody else. It's up to us as citizens and ratepayers to communicate with our politicians and get them straight, because this is a serious problem. I think Governor Abbott has had his cage rattled very seriously the last couple of days. He's kind of changed his tune. Now he's saying, we don't want to go into this new Green Deal stuff anymore, because this is going to be a disaster. And you're right. You're right. This kills people, and people lose money, and people lose all sorts of things. It's not fun having no electricity in 2-degree weather. I mean, try it sometime. It's one thing. I live in Washington, D.C. Sometimes in the spring we lose power for a couple hours because of a thunderstorm, no big deal. But to be without power for 3 days in 2-degree weather, when you're not ready for it, that's a very serious situation.
Well, I remember in Missouri, one of the biggest wind farm gifts went to the Carnahan family, who is a former governor of Missouri, and big political player family. And a lot of these gifts do end up going to very politically connected families of Democrat connected players. It's just the facts. And I want to say something else about this. I also know that these so-called scientists, these environmental scientists, as you wrote about in your book, Junk Science, there's a lot of stuff that goes on that's very, very, very scary behind the scenes. I have a good friend, James Instrom, Dr. James Instrom, out of UCLA, tenured professor. He went and did a study along the roads and said, oh gosh, you know what? Guess what? The trees along the roadside on the freeway actually are very healthy trees. It actually doesn't hurt for cars to emit CO2 along the roads. It actually makes them healthier. And they emit more oxygen for, guess what, people to breathe, because that's the way God set things up. I mean, he didn't say that part. That was me injecting. And guess what? His tenure was revoked for that, because you as a scientist are not there to tell the truth of your findings. You're there to to keep your job and to give yourself another, continuation of your job. And so this kind of science is scary to me, Steve. We have about 30 seconds remaining, but people need to look into this and read your book.
Well, thank you. I know Jim Enstrom. He's a great guy. I've worked with him a lot. There is a lot of monkey business going on with science. It has cost us a lot of jobs. They did a lot of junk science during the Obama administration, killed the coal industry. Biden administration is prepared to crank that up again. You're right. There are politicians on both sides of the aisle that are on the take from the wind and solar industry. And the only one that's going to look out for us is ourselves.
That's right. All right, Steve, thank you so much for being with us.
All right, thank you.
Coming up, Joe Biden's CNN town hall last night was full of falsehoods